Wherever you are in the world, welcome to another edition of Jerry's Take on China, and I'm Jerry. Why is it, a couple of people have asked me, despite being a member of the Five Eyes intelligence sharing community, that New Zealand has such a good rapport and is increasing its business with China? I've made a couple of videos about the G20 and APEC, and I've made comments that Australia seems to be slowly turning toward, although not yet actually on the path towards reconciliation with China. There's still work to be done. China is Australia's largest customer as well as their largest supplier. A staggering total of 42% of all exports from Australia are heading into China. And interestingly, Australia are one of the only countries in the world to hold a trade surplus with their behemoth neighbour. Australia absolutely cannot afford to lose China as a client. To do so would be economic suicide. So it is interesting that intelligent people who are elected to represent an affluent and thriving nation such as Australia can't seem to see the obvious writing on the wall. Imagine being a business leader and throwing insults or accusations at your customer, the one who provides you almost half your total business. It beggars belief that anyone with any intelligence would do that unless they had no choice. I really don't know what power the US holds over Australia. I'm not going to speculate on whether they force, coerce, blackmail or threaten Australia, but it's clear to me that something is going on. Because not only do the politicians support poking China in the eye, the media shamelessly promotes it and the voting public encourage it. So something is going on, and that causes Australians to think China is their enemy. It's not. I've even been told by friends in Australia that they think China will invade them. I've heard several times about how Australia feels a need to support Taiwan when, not if, but when China invades them. Although, to paraphrase Paul Keating's remarks, there's no strategic interest in supporting Taiwan. Why on earth would Australia do that? Taiwan is no more useful or legally bound by treaties to Australia than Kazakhstan, for example. When it's put so well by such a person as Paul Keating, it really does make sense. Australia is, quite simply, wrong to postulate against China for many reasons. And if this is true, why is it that New Zealand isn't getting it so wrong? There are two reasons that I can see. One is factual, and the other is purely speculative opinion. But see if it makes sense to you. The first one is factual. News Corp, Rupert Murdoch's media empire, has no hold in New Zealand. There are rumours, stories, that he's been banned, but there isn't any truth in that. There are no laws preventing Murdoch from operating in New Zealand, and in fact he is planning to return into that market. But with the exception of a barely watched Fox News, he's not currently active in New Zealand. There is, however, a bill which prevents any foreigner from owning more than 20%, and this bill was introduced in 1965 specifically because Murdoch was circling the perimeter of New Zealand press with a view to expanding his very small, at that time, Adelaide, Australia-based media group. So when people say he's banned, he's not. But as always, there is a little truth in the rumour. The other reason I see, and please bear in mind this is just a theory, but stick with it, tell me if you agree. Oligarchs seem to be in control of Washington. I think we can all agree on that. Washington is in control of the defense of the world. And when I say defense, that may have been how they perceive it, but in the last 70 years, they've started, continued, encouraged, and perpetuated wars. That's an entire generation that hasn't really known any peace. For a country that prides itself on freedom and democracy, that's a pretty sad indictment. But who drives this? Is it the politicians? Is it the people? Or is it the media? And the answer is yes to all of them. But who controls that? Who controls the media that drives the public opinion? Who donates to the politicians who write the legislation? And who controls the military or the military equipment which participates and is needed for the wars. Who, for that matter, profits from it? Obviously, one thing that happens with endless wars is that the rich get richer and the poor are forced into the military so they can get health and education and potentially shot and killed. But what's the point in getting richer and richer if there's a nuclear war and you can't spend it? Well, they've come up with a solution. A Texas-based survival shelter company, Rising S Company, confirms that it has built more than 10 survival shelters in New Zealand for its clients. If we were to read a copy of a book called The Sovereign Individual, we'd understand why in this the authors William Rees-Mogg, the late father of UK politician Jacob, and American James Davidson knew what the answer was. A cataclysmic event, a global pandemic, or a nuclear war would leave New Zealand, due to its remote geographical location, relatively unscathed. A nuclear war wouldn't touch New Zealand because of its stance on nuclear power and nuclear weapons. No one is likely to invade nor need to defend New Zealand because it doesn't really have any enemies. Now, that's not to suggest New Zealand wouldn't have problems. They certainly would. Depending on the event, there could be floods, droughts, famines, nuclear fallout. And this is why bunkers, not just properties, in New Zealand are the answer. And this looks like one very important reason why no one of these oligarchs is driving this lightly populated, remotely located and beautiful country of New Zealand into the same kind of frenzy of the rest of the English-speaking world. They don't seem to be engaging in this. The profiteers of perpetual war need New Zealand to be left intact as their last refuge for when things really go wrong. And that's why I think New Zealand doesn't have the same problems with China, because they don't want it to. Please let me know if you agree with me. Please leave some comments, like, share and subscribe, and thank you very much once again for watching Jerry's Take on China. See you next time.